Sarah's thumb hovered over her phone screen, her brow furrowed in concentration. She'd been mindlessly swiping through profiles on the dating app for the past hour, a glass of red wine keeping her company on this quiet Friday night. At 35, newly divorced and thrust back into the dating world, she felt like a fish out of water. "Why did I let Megan talk me into this?" she muttered, taking another sip of wine. Her best friend had insisted that online dating was the way to go, especially in their suburban New Jersey town, where meeting new people wasn't always easy. As she was about to call it a night, a familiar face flashed across her screen. Sarah blinked, certain she was seeing things. She sat up straight, wine forgotten, as she stared at the image of a man she knew all too well, David Parker, Megan's husband of 10 years. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, her heart racing. She tapped on his profile, and there was no mistaking it. It was definitely David. His warm brown eyes, the slight crook in his nose from a childhood accident, and that charming smile that had always made Megan swoon. Sarah's mind reeled. Why was David on a dating app? Was this some kind of joke? She knew things hadn't been perfect between Megan and David lately. Megan had confided as much during their weekly coffee dates. But this? This was beyond anything she had imagined. Her finger trembled as it hovered over the like button. A part of her screamed to exit the app, delete it, and pretend she'd never seen this. But another part, a part she wasn't proud of, urged her to swipe right, to see what would happen. In a moment of weakness or perhaps curiosity, she did it. She swiped right on her best friend's husband. Seconds later, her phone pinged. It was a match. Sarah's stomach dropped. She stared at the notification, her hands shaking. What had she done? And more importantly, what was she going to do now? Before she could process her thoughts, a message popped up. "David, Sarah, is that really you?" She stared at the words, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Shock, betrayal on behalf of her friend, and an unexpected flicker of excitement that she immediately tried to squash. Sarah, "David, I think we need to talk." David, "Yeah, I guess we do. This isn't what it looks like." Sarah snorted. It was exactly what it looked like, but she was willing to hear him out. "For Megan's sake," she told herself. Sarah, "Coffee tomorrow? The usual place?" There was a pause, long enough for Sarah to wonder if he'd changed his mind, if he was frantically trying to figure out how to backpedal out of this situation. David, "Okay, 10 a.m. Sarah, "See you then." She put her phone down, her hands trembling slightly. What had started as a mundane Friday night had suddenly turned into the beginning of something she couldn't quite define. As she lay in bed that night, sleep eluding her, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of a precipice, about to take a leap that would change everything. Little did she know, as the first rays of sunlight began to creep through her curtains, that this was only the beginning. The choices she would make in the coming days would set in motion a series of events that would test the boundaries of friendship, love, and loyalty, leaving no one unscathed in its wake. Sarah arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, her nerves on edge. She chose a secluded table in the corner, away from the windows and prying eyes. As she waited, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. She should be calling Megan right now, telling her everything. That's what best friends do, isn't it? The bell above the door chimed, and David walked in. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Sarah. He looked different, somehow. Not the relaxed, jovial David she was used to seeing at backyard barbecues and dinner parties. This David seemed tense, almost vulnerable. "Hey," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me." Sarah nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "David, what's going on? Why are you on a dating app?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Sarah had seen countless times when he was stressed. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicate it," Sarah said, her voice harder than she intended. "Megan is my best friend. I need to understand what's happening here." David sighed deeply. "Megan and we've been having problems for a while now. She doesn't know I know, but she's been talking about leaving me." Sarah's eyes widened. This was news to her. Sure, Megan had mentioned some rough patches, but leaving? How do you know? "I overheard her on the phone with her sister last month. She was saying how unhappy she was, how she felt trapped." His voice cracked slightly. "I panicked. I thought maybe if I could prove to myself that I was still desirable, still worthy of love, I could fix things with Megan." Sarah felt a pang of sympathy, quickly followed by anger. "So, you decided to cheat on her? How would that fix anything?" "I wasn't going to actually meet anyone," David protested. I just, I don't know. I guess I just wanted to feel wanted again. They sat in silence for a moment, the buzz of the coffee shop fading into the background. Sarah studied David's face, seeing the pain and confusion etched in the lines around his eyes. Despite herself, she felt drawn to him, wanting to comfort him. David, she said softly, reaching out to touch his hand before thinking better of it and pulling back. You need to talk to Megan. Tell her how you feel. This isn't the way to solve your problems. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. You're right. I know you're right. It's been so long since anyone's really seen me, you know? But you've always had a way of understanding. Sarah felt a flutter in her stomach at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest. She pushed the feeling down, reminding herself of Megan, of their friendship. I should go, David said, standing up. Thank you, Sarah, for listening, for not judging. You're a good friend. As he turned to leave, Sarah found herself calling out, David, wait! He paused, looking back at her questioningly. If you need to talk again, I'm here, she said, immediately regretting the words as they left her mouth. David's face softened into a smile, the first genuine one she'd seen since he arrived. Thank you. I might take you up on that. As Sarah watched him leave, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Relief that it wasn't as bad as she'd feared, concern for her friend's marriage, and something else. Something she didn't want to name. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over Megan's number. She should call her, tell her everything. That's what a good friend would do. Instead, she found herself opening the dating app, staring at David's profile. Before she could think twice, she sent him a message. Sarah, if you want to talk again, maybe we should keep it here. Safer that way. The response came almost immediately. David, you're probably right. Thanks, Sarah, for everything. As she left the coffee shop, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stepped onto a slippery slope. But whether it led to salvation or ruin, only time would tell. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself in a dizzying spiral of guilt and exhilaration. Her conversations with David on the dating app had started innocently enough, supportive messages, friendly advice about his marriage. But as the days passed, their chats grew longer, more frequent, and increasingly intimate. Sarah learned things about David she'd never known before. His childhood dreams of becoming a writer, his secret passion for painting, the depth of his fears about losing Megan. In turn, she found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with anyone else, not even Megan. One night, as she lay in bed, her phone buzzed with a new message. David, I can't stop thinking about you, Sarah. Her heart raced as she read the words. She knew she should shut this down, end it before it went too far. Instead, her fingers moved of their own accord. Sarah, I can't stop thinking about you either. David, we should meet, not at the coffee shop, somewhere private. Sarah hesitated, her conscience screaming at her to say no. But the pull was too strong. Sarah, okay, when and where? They agreed to meet at a small hotel just outside of town the following afternoon. As Sarah got ready, she tried to rationalize her actions. She was just going to talk to him, to help him sort out his feelings for Megan. But deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. The hotel room was nondescript, with beige walls and generic art prints. David was already there when she arrived, pacing nervously. Sarah, he breathed, his eyes lighting up as she entered. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't sure either, she admitted, her heart pounding. They stood there, the tension between them palpable. And then, as if drawn by an invisible force, they moved towards each other. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, years of repressed feelings exploding to the surface. As they fell onto the bed, all thoughts of Megan, of friendship, of right and wrong disappeared. In that moment, there was only David and Sarah, lost in each other. Hours later, as they lay tangled in the sheets, the reality of what they'd done began to sink in. Oh, God, Sarah whispered, tears forming in her eyes. What have we done? David pulled her close, stroking her hair. I don't know, he said softly. But I don't regret it. Do you? Sarah wanted to say yes, to tell him this was a mistake that could never happen again. Instead, she found herself shaking her head. No, she whispered. I don't regret it. As they dressed and prepared to leave separately, David caught Sarah's hand. This doesn't have to be a one-time thing, he said, his eyes pleading. We shouldn't, Sarah interrupted, but her resolve was weak. But we will, David finished, and Sarah nodded, sealing their fate. Over the next month, Sarah and David met in secret whenever they could. Hotel rooms, secluded parks, once even in Sarah's apartment when she was sure her neighbors weren't home. Each time, Sarah told herself it would be the last. Each time, she failed to end it. Meanwhile, her friendship with Megan became strained. Every time Megan complained about David being distant, every time she confided her fears about her marriage, Sarah felt like a knife was twisting in her gut. But still, she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. One evening, as Sarah was getting ready for another secret rendezvous with David, her phone rang. It was Megan. Sarah? Megan's voice was thick with tears. I need you. Can you come over? Sarah froze, her guilt threatening to overwhelm her. Of course, she heard herself say. I'll be right there. As she drove to Megan's house, Sarah's mind raced. She needed to end this, to confess everything to Megan. It was the only way to salvage what was left of their friendship. But when she arrived and saw Megan's tear-stained face, all her resolve crumbled. Oh, honey, she said, pulling her friend into a hug. What happened? Megan's next words made Sarah's blood run cold. It's David, Megan sobbed. I think he's having an affair. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She struggled to keep her expression neutral as Megan's words hung in the air between them. An affair? Sarah managed to choke out. Why do you think that? Megan wiped her eyes, collapsing onto the couch. He's been so distant lately. Always on his phone, smiling at messages. He comes home late, with vague excuses about work. She looked up at Sarah, her eyes red and puffy. And yesterday I found a receipt for a hotel in his jacket pocket. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She knew exactly which receipt Megan was talking about. She'd been there with David just last week. Maybe it's not what you think, Sarah heard herself say, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Have you talked to him about it? Megan shook her head. I'm scared, Sarah. What if it's true? What if he doesn't love me anymore? As Sarah held her sobbing friend, guilt and shame threatened to suffocate her. She was the cause of this pain. She was destroying her best friend's marriage, her life. Listen to me, Sarah said, pulling away to look Megan in the eye. You need to confront him. You deserve the truth, Megan. Megan nodded, wiping her nose. You're right. I'll talk to him tonight when he gets home. She gave Sarah a watery smile. What would I do without you? You're such a good friend. Each word was like a dagger in Sarah's heart. She mumbled something about always being there for Megan and made an excuse to leave, promising to check in the next day. As soon as she was in her car, Sarah called David. Megan knows, she blurted out as soon as he answered. What? How? David's voice was panicked. She found a hotel receipt. She's going to confront you tonight. Sarah's mind was racing. David, we have to end this. We have to tell her the truth. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I can't lose her, Sarah, David finally said, his voice breaking. I love her. I do. This thing between us, it was a mistake. Sarah felt as if she'd been slapped. A mistake, she repeated numbly. I'm sorry, Sarah, but Megan is my wife. I need to fix this. The call ended, leaving Sarah sitting in her car, tears streaming down her face. She'd risked everything, her friendship, her integrity, for a man who saw her as nothing more than a mistake. That night, Sarah tossed and turned, imagining the confrontation happening at the Parkers' house. When morning came, she reached for her phone, dreading what she might find. There was a single text from Megan. Can you come over? I need you. Sarah's stomach churned as she drove to Megan's house. This was it, the moment of truth. She'd confess everything, beg for forgiveness, accept whatever consequences came. But when Megan opened the door, her face was calm, almost serene. Come in, Megan said, her voice oddly flat. We need to talk. Sarah followed her friend into the living room, her heart pounding. Megan, Save it! Megan cut her off, her eyes suddenly blazing with fury. I know everything. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean? Megan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? My husband and my best friend? How cliché. Megan, I'm so sorry, Sarah began, tears welling in her eyes. Sorry, Megan spat. You're sorry. You've been sleeping with my husband for months, lying to my face, and you think sorry is enough? Sarah flinched at the venom in her friend's voice. I never meant for this to happen. We never meant to hurt you. But you did, Megan said, her voice low and dangerous. You betrayed me in the worst possible way. Both of you. Where's David? Sarah asked, suddenly realizing he wasn't there. A slow, almost predatory smile spread across Megan's face. Oh, he's gone. I kicked him out last night, but don't worry, I'm not done with either of you yet. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at Megan's words. What do you mean? Megan leaned in close, her eyes glittering with malice. You took everything from me. Now, I'm going to take everything from you. Both of you. And I promise, by the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd never laid eyes on each other. As Sarah stumbled out of the house, Megan's threat ringing in her ears, she realized that her worst nightmare had come true. She'd lost her best friend, the man she thought she loved, and any shred of self-respect she had left. But little did she know, Megan's promise of revenge was just the beginning. The real storm was yet to come, and it would leave no one unscathed in its wake. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life crumbled around her. She'd underestimated Megan's capacity for vengeance, and now she was paying the price. It started small. Sarah's car tires were slashed, forcing her to miss an important work presentation. Then, anonymous emails were sent to her boss, detailing her affair with a married man and questioning her moral character. Before she knew it, Sarah was out of a job, her professional reputation in tatters. David wasn't faring any better. Megan had frozen their joint accounts and filed for divorce, citing infidelity. She'd also contacted his company's board of directors, revealing that David had been using company resources to conduct his affair. He was suspended pending an investigation. One rainy afternoon, Sarah found David on her doorstep, looking haggard and defeated. Can I come in? He asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah hesitated, but nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. I've lost everything, David said, collapsing onto her couch. My job, my home, my wife. God, what have we done, Sarah? Sarah felt a flicker of anger. We. You were the one who called this a mistake, remember? You were going to fix things with Megan? David had the decency to look ashamed. I was scared. I thought I could salvage my marriage, but Megan, she knew everything. She'd been tracking my phone, reading our messages. She even had pictures of us together. Sarah's blood ran cold. Pictures? How? Private investigator, David said bitterly. Apparently, she'd suspected something for weeks. She was just waiting for concrete proof. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their choices pressing down on them. What do we do now? Sarah finally asked. David shook his head. I I don't know. I've been staying at a motel, but I'm almost out of money. I can't get a job with this investigation hanging over my head. I, I think I might have to move back in with my parents. Sarah felt a twinge of pity, quickly followed by resentment. She'd lost just as much as he had, but she didn't have parents to fall back on. She was alone. I think you should go, she said quietly. David looked up, surprised. Sarah, I mean, after everything we've been through. That's just it, David, Sarah interrupted. We've been through hell, and for what? A few months of sneaking around, it wasn't worth it. None of it was worth this. As she closed the door behind him, Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and emptiness. She'd thought she was in love with David, but now she realized it had been nothing more than a fantasy, an escape from her lonely life. That night, as Sarah lay in bed, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I hope you're enjoying the consequences of your actions, but don't worry, I'm not done yet. Imp. Sarah's hands shook as she read the message. She'd thought Megan's revenge was complete, but apparently her former best friend had more in store. Over the next few days, Sarah became increasingly paranoid. She jumped at every sound, constantly looking over her shoulder. She could feel Megan's presence everywhere, waiting to strike again. It was during this state of heightened anxiety that Sarah received an unexpected visitor. A knock on her door revealed a stern-looking woman in a suit. Sarah Thompson? The woman asked. Sarah nodded, her heart racing. I'm Detective Lisa Carter. We need to talk about Megan Parker. As Sarah let the detective in, her mind whirled with possibilities. Had Megan done something illegal in her quest for revenge? Or worse, had something happened to Megan? Detective Carter's next words stopped Sarah's thoughts in their tracks. Ms. Thompson, I'm investigating the disappearance of Megan Parker. And right now, you and David Parker are our prime suspects. Sarah felt the room spin as the detective's words sank in. Megan was missing, and now the web of lies and betrayal she'd helped weave was about to ensnare her in ways she never could have imagined. As Detective Carter began to ask her questions, Sarah realized that her nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. Sarah's world narrowed to the small interrogation room at the police station. She'd been questioned for hours, her story dissected and scrutinized from every angle. Detective Carter's piercing gaze seemed to see right through her, picking apart every inconsistency, every half-truth. "Let's go over this one more time," Detective Carter said, her voice tinged with frustration. "When was the last time you saw Megan Parker?" Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion washing over her. "I've told you already. It was 3 weeks ago, at her house. She confronted me about the affair with David. She was angry, threatening." "Threatening enough for you to want her out of the picture?" Carter interrupted. "No!" Sarah exclaimed. "I would never hurt Megan. Despite everything, she was my best friend." Carter's eyebrow arched. "Best friends don't sleep with each other's husbands, Miss Thompson." The truth of those words stung, but before Sarah could respond, the door opened. Another detective poked his head in, gesturing for Carter to step outside. Sarah's heart raced as she watched them whisper urgently in the hallway. When Carter returned, her face was unreadable. "You're free to go, Miss Thompson. But don't leave town. We'll be in touch." Confused and wary, Sarah gathered her belongings. As she stepped out of the station, she saw David being led away in handcuffs, his face ashen. "David?" she called out, but he didn't even look her way. "Ms. Thompson," Carter's voice came from behind her, "I suggest you get a lawyer. This isn't over." The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah's phone rang incessantly with calls from reporters, old friends, and family members she hadn't spoken to in years. The story had broken. Suburban love triangle ends in mysterious disappearance. Sarah's face was plastered across every local news channel, her past mistakes laid bare for all to see. It was on the 5th day after her interrogation that everything changed. Sarah was huddled in her apartment, blinds drawn, when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Turn on your TV, Channel 5, now." With trembling hands, Sarah fumbled for the remote. As the screen flickered to life, she gasped. There, looking poised and collected, was Megan. "I want to thank everyone for their concern," Megan was saying, her voice steady. "But I assure you, I'm perfectly fine. I needed some time away to process recent events in my life. I never intended to cause such alarm." The reporter looked bewildered. "Mrs. Parker, are you saying you weren't in any danger? That you left of your own accord?" Megan's smile was cold. "That's correct. And I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize to the police department for any resources wasted on my behalf, particularly to Detectives Carter and Johnson, who I believe have been working tirelessly on this case." As the interview continued, Sarah's phone exploded with notifications. Texts, emails, voicemails, all demanding explanations, apologies, statements. But Sarah couldn't tear her eyes away from the screen, from Megan's calm demeanor that belied the storm Sarah knew was raging beneath. This had been Megan's plan all along. The ultimate revenge, to let Sarah and David twist in the wind, to let them feel the fear and paranoia of being suspected of a terrible crime, to destroy their reputation so thoroughly that no apology or explanation could ever rebuild them. The next morning, Sarah awoke to a single text message. "Now we're even. Goodbye, Sarah." Emma? In that moment, Sarah understood the true cost of her actions. She had lost her job, her reputation, and any semblance of the life she once had. But more than that, she had lost the one person who had known her better than anyone else, her best friend. As she looked out her window at the reporters still camped on her lawn, at the neighborhood she could no longer call home, Sarah realized that Megan's revenge was complete. There would be no redemption, no chance to make things right. The trust she had broken could never be repaired. In the end, Sarah was left with nothing but the bitter taste of regret and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest punishment for our mistakes is having to live with them. She picked up her phone one last time, her finger hovering over Megan's contact. After a moment's hesitation, she deleted it, along with David's. It was time to face the consequences of her actions and find a way to rebuild her life, alone. As she began to pack her belongings, preparing to leave behind the shattered remains of her old life, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, in the grand scheme of things, who had really won? And more importantly, was winning worth the price they had all paid? The answer, she realized, was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life.